And then the numbers even grow. COVID-19 will push as many as 150 million people into extreme poverty by 2021, said the World Bank. So that's even more than the 130 million predicted by the United Nations by the UN Food Program. These guys are saying, the World Bank is saying 150 million more people in extreme poverty by 2021.
If we lock down our economy, then it hits our economy. But it also means we are not buying stuff. We're not trading with weaker economies. We are not just destroying our own jobs, we're destroying the jobs of all those that in the poorer parts of the world that export to us. That seemed to me to be a reasonable point.
Really important point by Professor Gupta. I want to say it again. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. But by and large, we'd rather not do it. Just look at what's happened to the tourism industry, for example, in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, because people aren't taking their holidays. Look what's happened to smallholder farmers all over the world because their markets have got dented. Look what's happening to poverty levels. It seems that we may well have a doubling of world poverty by next year. We may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition because children are not getting meals at school and their parents in poor families are not able to afford it. This is a terrible, ghastly global catastrophe, actually. And so we really do appeal to all world leaders. Stop using lockdown as your primary control method. Develop better systems for doing it. Work together and learn from each other. But remember, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never, ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer.
Indeed, and a rise in world poverty after years and years in which world poverty was falling and falling. And yep. We've reversed almost decades of progress going back. In
the vast majority of people who've died of COVID-19, think about the irony of this, and I'm not trying to blame or criticize. We just got to realize the reality of the trade-off we've chosen here. The vast majority of people who've died of COVID-19 have lifestyle-related diseases from being overfed with calorie-dense, nutrient-less junk food in the West. Obesity is the leading risk factor for death from COVID-19. And I understand the elderly population is just vulnerable, but among the elderly and definitely among the non-elderly, it's lifestyle. It's a lifestyle death count, the vast majority of that 200,000. So what have we just done? We are now knowingly, those who are in the know, saying we're going to lock down in an attempt to save lives of people who are killing themselves with their diet already. And we're going to withhold aid from starving children. And millions of them, millions of people in the third world will be dying of diseases and malnutrition because we're locking down economies to try to save the lives of people who are overfed. People who are underfed are going to die. You might say that's the rude way to say it. It's the facts of what we're doing, not in an effort. I mean, the people who are dying, who are obese, are also humans who God loved and died for. And we've got to reach out to them with the gospel and with a healing message as well. But are the lockdowns even saving lives? My heart just goes out to these innocent children who are in this situation, and we've got to really be giving people. We really need to be reaching out with the aid and what's called the welfare ministry, meaning the well-being of people and helping them out.
An accomplished physician, a scholar of public health, and a colleague of mine at the Hoover Institution, Scott Atlas, on what we've learned about the virus and why the time has come to end the lockdown. Welcome, everyone, to another special Plague Time edition of Uncommon Knowledge with Peter Robinson. Scott, welcome. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Speaking in early March, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, quote, "The flu has a mortality rate of 0.1%. This, the COVID-19 virus, this has a mortality rate of 10 times that," close quote. Dr. Atlas, was Dr. Fauci correct?
Well, no. I mean, at the time, there was very little known, to be fair. The evidence that was leaking out really from China and through the WHO actually said that the fatality rate was 3.4%. And at that point in time, the fatality rate of that high, it's reasonable to say, hey, that's justifiable to lock down temporarily, because that would have been really catastrophic. And the models that were made at that time projected literally catastrophic losses, millions of people dying in the US, millions of people dying in the UK, for example. But of course, we've learned since then. So the answer is no.
Okay, we will come to that. The costs of the lockdown. We've heard over and over and over again about the costs of the virus to us, but you have written lately about the costs of the lockdown. So let me ask you to take us through an article that you and your co-authors, John Burge, how's that pronounced? John Burge and Ralph Keeney published in The Hill in late May. From that article, quote, statistically, every 10 million to 24 million lost in U.S. incomes results in one additional death, close quote. How do you derive that? What does that mean?
Yes, well, let me just acknowledge the fourth co-author, who is Alexander Lipton. Who is, yes. But in any event, what's happened is when you look at this kind of number, someone might say, well, where'd you get that? Well, these are data, these are numbers that are pretty established in the economics literature, in actuarial tables, and in a variety of other publications that are published. We didn't do, I just want to clarify, we did not do any sort of model or complex hypothetical projection. We looked at established sort of retrospective data that has been done that is empirical, that correlates loss of economic productivity, unemployment, and similarly the healthcare losses that we went through.
All right. And is this work that's been done? I'm familiar with work, this is your field, not mine. So when I say I'm familiar, I have a layman's sort of glancing familiarity with work that's been done on the so-called deaths of despair, particularly in Appalachia, opioid deaths that's related to unemployment. People lose their jobs, the income departs from a town or a region, and alcoholism goes up, opioid abuse goes up, death rates of all kinds go up. That's the work?
Well, actually,
or does it go even farther back than that?
Well, it's partly that, but really most of the stuff that we included in the true healthcare losses were listed in that piece, which are very, very limited list of things. But you're right, the unemployment itself leads to worsening health and loss of lives and life years, which is exactly the way economists really have to classify things. It's the life years that decrease life expectancy per se. It's not just direct healthcare.
Somebody who dies at the age of 20 has lost more, according to the economist's calculations, than someone who dies at the age of 90. Lost more life years. Is that correct? All right.
That's exactly right. And that's a very important part of this to understand.
Right. Again, I'm quoting from that article. In addition to lives lost because of lost income, lives also are lost due to delayed or foregone health care. Explain that, Scott.
Sure. And this is one of the really horrifying but underemphasized truths of the cost of the lockdown. As we said in the article, for instance, 650,000 Americans have cancer and undergo chemotherapy right now, currently. Half of them stop getting their chemotherapy. And that's just not, that's actually happened in the U.S. during this so-called lockdown.
Because they're scared of going into the hospital that they might get the COVID, or because the hospitals have shut down, or some combination of all of this?
Exactly, and this is a good question. There are two reasons. One is, in the beginning, the hospitals, because of anticipated overcrowding, decided we're going to stop, quote unquote, non-essential procedures. And what that meant was not what a layman would understand off at a glance, which would be, oh, that's cosmetic surgery, that's these little, okay, you know, I mean, we're going to get
we can live without that.
We can live without that. But the reality is non-essential procedures meant everything that was non-emergent. And so that means literally thousands of biopsies per week of potential cancers were not done. All scheduled hip replacements, knee replacements were not done. And all kinds of other things, including, for instance, we have something like, I forget the number of total number of cancer screenings, but 2/3 to 3/4 of cancer screenings were not done.
May I make a little confession? I got an email from a medical facility that you and I both know, and where I go, and it said, "You're due for a colonoscopy." I'm not especially happy to undergo a colonoscopy at any point, but I thought to myself, you know what? Just at this moment, I think I'll skip it. That's the kind of thing you're talking about. That's happening across the country.
And the second part is what you had alluded to, which is the fear, because it turned out that even emergency care was not getting done. 40% of people who had an acute stroke, you basically have 0 to 6 hours from your symptoms to get into the hospital to get treated. Those 40% of them did not call the ambulance. That's out of fear. Same thing with heart attacks. 50% of people with heart attacks did not call the ambulance.
So we have so-called deaths of despair, the horrible things that happen when people lose their jobs or income just generally drops. We also have all kinds of medical procedures that ought to happen that are not happening. And these are not small effects, they're large. I'm quoting again your article in The Hill, quote, "The disease, that is COVID-19, has been responsible for 800,000 lost years of life, not individual deaths, but lost years of life so far. The national lockdown is responsible for at least 700,000 lost years of life every month, or about 1.5 million so far, already far surpassing the COVID-19 total," close quote. That's more than arresting. It's shocking. You are saying the lockdown has already cost twice as many years of life as the virus it was supposed to protect us against. Have I got that right? That is, you're just saying that's factually, as best social scientists can come to the numbers, those are the numbers.
Those are the conservative numbers, because in that calculation, we only included the lost years of life from unemployment in terms of the economic side. And we lost the lives lost from the specific health list of about half a dozen healthcare misses that were not getting done. And so we were very conservative, intentionally so.
Do not despair. This is a struggling time on many levels, as we're going to cover in this session, for people who are struggling not just with their physical health from COVID, but even more so the underlying causes of the COVID deaths and the things that people have been not treating and addressing during those times of lockdown, as you heard in the clip. And the mental health issues. Our job is to reach out with the right arm of the gospel, to bring the spiritual healing and hope to hearts that are struggling. And as you're going to see, the economic despair and the drug abuse and everything, we're going to cover a lot of that data. These guys have just given us a little introduction into what we're covering in this session. But let us always remember as we travel through this information that it represents a society that needs the gospel, needs Christ. And also let it be a lesson for us in how we react or overreact in irrational, imbalanced ways without looking at cost-benefit, looking only at one hype, danger, and fear, and not all the other potential problems that are caused by the reaction of the solution itself, where the solution is worse than the disease. But it's interesting to me that they don't put that number right there on the news every night, right? We should have the death count due to lockdown in addition to the death count supposedly due to coronavirus. By the way, we've got 3 times higher anxiety rates in mental health studies. People are reporting anxiety at 3-fold the rate that they were last year. And that last year was double versus what it was 10 years before among young adults and teens because of media use. So it was already high because of social media and so much emotional and social dysfunction. But now because of the nonstop fear-mongering, you have 1/3 of Americans now show signs of clinical anxiety or depression. So do not despair, my friends. Find the solace of Christ and the loving arms of Jesus, who is your protection and your Savior and your friend. He reaches out to you with that heart of infinite fatherly tender care. After his lost sheep, you might say, I'm not worthy of that. I should feel all out of sorts because I'm so rotten and I can't. No, my friends, Jesus came and died for you. Do not despair. When I see data like this, a 3-fold increase in anxiety, we have a job to do, brothers and sisters. We have a job to do to reach out to the hurting soul, not to distance ourselves from people. This is catastrophic. This is never before seen numbers like this. 3 times increase in overdose deaths. 11% of people in the survey had contemplated suicide. Have you ever seen numbers like this? This is unbelievable. What have we done? A quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds have contemplated suicide. That's twice as much than the previous year. 25% of people 18 to 24 have thought about killing themselves. This is a time where we need the work of Christ in this world more than ever. Our churches to be open, our hearts to be open, and our hands to be reaching out.